Okay. Thanks so much, Dr. Hagan, Dr. Chapman. Big shoes to follow after these great talks. I'll kind of finish off these last 15 minutes talking about just things that I've learned and maybe a thought process that I have in my role as program director. I took over for Dr. Doug Hanel July of 2019 and immediately tried to oversee a residency program with COVID and aspergillus and everything else that's been happening. But I think I've learned quite a bit just from gleaning from my direct experience and learning from great partners like Dr. Hagan and others here at the University of Washington. So thanks for having me. No relevant disclosures. I am still actively learning how to teach orthopedic surgery while simultaneously trying to figure out how to do orthopedic surgery well. So just that as my main disclaimer. Just like any other good talk, we'll kind of hit a couple of points over the next 15 minutes. And just starting out with just these generations defined. In general, generations can be defined by the age or how old you might be as an indication of what generation you fit in. In general, we think of the baby boomers being in their mid 50s to mid 70s. Gen X, the next generation, being somewhere in the early 40s to mid 50s. The generation below that, the millennials, which this talk is really going to focus on, also known as Gen Y, being in their mid 20s to early 40s. And then Gen Z, at this moment in time, being the current or kind of youngest generation. But I think more helpful than age, I think understanding or thinking about generations in relation to that group of people's shaping events, I think is a little easier. So the boomers, classically, we think of them as being a part of this post-World War II optimism and growth, especially here in the United States, the Cold War, hippie movement. Generation X, this latchkey generation, a small generation sandwiched in between two large or our largest generations, the boomers and the millennials. And I think that the key shaping event of Generation X is this transition into what is now our current technology. So Generation X, if you remember what life was like with a dial-up phone, quarters in the payphone that you had to find, 386 computers, like if that really rings true, like in terms of your memory, then you are probably Generation X. And that is differentiated with millennials, which they're kind of defined as the generation who clearly remembers 9/11, lived through the Great Recession in that early mid 2000s, but more important than that, born with the current iteration of technology and probably more importantly, social media. So like they don't remember having no smartphones or no internet or no email. That's not a memory that they clearly have. They only remember what we have now. And then Generation Z, we don't know yet, honestly. It's like how they're going to be defined is basically determined by what's happening now or in recent memory. So it might be the war in Ukraine. It might be this upcoming recession. Who knows? In orthopedic surgery, our current workforce in ortho are made up of boomers. They're the professors. They're retired, approaching retirement, kind of on the back half of their career. Generation X is truly a mix of junior, mid, and senior faculty. And the millennials are basically our trainees. They do make up some of our junior faculty, but essentially they are our current trainees. And the next generation up are either in medical school or in college and soon to be our next group of learners that we're going to have to understand and help with. So this talk is really focused on millennials primarily, because that's who makes up our current trainee workforce. And so just in general, conceptually, I think you can make some arguments that some of the strengths of today's youth or the millennial generation is that they're smarter. I think that like finding answers and content is not an issue for them. So think back at your days in college, in med school, that if you had to find the answer to something, you had to go to the library, you had to find the textbook, you had to figure out what to do to just get the answer, to just know what it is you had to that had to do or understand. And now you literally can just type in something and figure out the answer instantaneously without having to go look it up or go physically go somewhere. I've had med students that almost verbalize the steps of a surgery that they're in with me because they watched a number of videos either created by myself or one of my partners or on a website, and they literally almost can just mimic what to do for an ACL surgery, for example. Multitasking has never been easier. I think that doing multiple things at the same time is something that I think the younger generation has become accustomed to, juggling things. I think before our current iteration of technology, you just kind of had to do one thing at a time. And if you didn't finish it, you weren't going to finish it. Whereas now you can stop and start and again, do things somewhat simultaneously. It's very clear that the young generation, they know how to navigate different types of media communication way better than the older generation. So whether it's an electronic medical record, emails, texts, anything, that they can navigate technology better than what you would consider the older generation, the boomers, and many of the Gen X faculty that we have. So if that's not really hard evidence. So if you need hard evidence that millennials might be smarter a generation, then there is some hard evidence. There's data of incoming orthopedic surgery residents from 2005. This was when I was in medical school, or kind of around the age when I was in medical school. And the mean step scores for people that were starting residency in 2005 was 230. They didn't even report their average step 2 scores. They didn't even report how many publications and presentations they had. And this is literally pulled from that 2005 data. 1/3 of incoming residents had no publications, had 0 publications, and 2/3 had at least 1. That's kind of how we defined the characteristics of an incoming orthopedic surgery resident. Now, 2020, 15 years later, and these numbers have only gone up in the last 2 years. Mean step scores almost 20 points greater or up to 20 or 30 points greater. Mean number of abstracts, presentations, and publications, 14.3, and only this number has gone up. And compare and contrast to 15 years before that, where 1/3 of the incoming orthopedic residents didn't even have any publications or research to speak of. So we've got some soft and some hard evidence that today's resident generation might be smarter. You can make an argument that they have more imagination. Some other things kind of pulled from the internet. Maybe they have less brand loyalty. They value access over ownership. But these are just some key features of how we would describe millennials and how they differ from Generation X and baby boomers. They're always on the go. They're disconnected, mobile, everything. And with that imagination and just kind of with the internet and that imagination has led to more creativity. So again, you can kind of make these arguments for the millennial generation. And I think there's a flip side. What are some of the challenges of growing up in the age of the internet or the current technology? Well, like how it might be a strength, instant answers and unlimited content, I think could be a detriment. So that same Google search, how to perform ACL surgery, 20 million results from how to perform ACL surgery. So if you pick the right 1 or 2 references or sites, then your money. And if you pick the wrong ones, you will be way off. And I think that problem of knowing what's good content, what's the right answer is a big deal. And I think it's more prevalent the more essentially infinite content you have access to. When you only had 1 or 2 things you could draw upon for an answer, you could take it to the bank that it was probably vetted out and it was probably real, and that's not the case anymore. One other big thing about just the current generation is this idea of instant gratification. Like the world is now totally hinged on instant gratification. So things like streaming TV. When I was a kid, I liked watching Seinfeld. A lot of my friends did. I had to wait till Thursday at 9 p.m. and turn on NBC to watch Seinfeld, like a show that I liked. Like I had to wait and physically turn on the TV at that time to watch the show that I wanted to. Whereas it does not matter what you like now. You can watch anything. You hear about people streaming, like just binge watching shows. It's just at the on demand click of a button. You could watch whatever show you want whenever you want to. You could Amazon everything. When I had to buy running shoes when I was little, I had to go to the Foot Locker. I don't even remember any other store that had shoes, try on the ones that they had on the shelf, hope that I could afford it, and like leave with the pair that I thought might work out. Whereas now, sitting down on the couch, click of a button, shop by brand, type, colors, reviews, anything. You just literally at the click of a button get what you want without too much physical hassle or mental hassle. Instant meals. When I was a kid, I ate a lot of ramen for better or worse. I had to boil the pot of water, like put it in the dish, clean up everything afterwards. And now, instant. Put hot water in there, eat it, throw everything away. There's literally no waiting. And just again, with the instant answers and the content, I pulled up all these images instantaneously when I put this talk together. So like that, you never could have done that 15, 20, 25 years ago. So just like just instant gratification, instant satisfaction, instant satiation of everything. The lens of social media, I think, is a huge thing that we totally underestimate or underappreciate how much that affects how millennials and for certain Generation Z think, like how they process life. This idea of Instagram life, it's kind of like you only see the best versions of others. You only try to present the best version of yourself, and you only see what ultimately is the best version of someone else. You know, it's like the lens of social media of what is real and what is presented. It can be so stark. This is the same human being that looks one way through their Instagram life or their social media life versus the reality. And I think you could take this example across the board. This is my kid last week who looks perfect and cute. And my family and my in-laws and friends all think that my youngest kid looks like this all the time, when he honestly, 90% of the time he looks like this. These pictures were actually taken the same day. And he looks like this way more often than he looks like this, but this is the picture that we text or email to our friends and family or post. And then again, moving that to an example of the into orthopedics, our trainees, like they remember or they see the best of someone else, and they only kind of remember the worst of their own experience because it doesn't seem like it matches up to what the references of out the social media lens. And you know, it doesn't matter if we're operating side by side in the first case. Heck, they might be doing everything and I'm like just standing behind them the second case, but they'll kind of remember the third case where I elbowed them out of the way and they had to hold hook because, you know, it was going slow or not right. And so just kind of the lens with which people just process things, I think is altered, and social media is a part of that. And so again, you know, another challenge I think that hinges off one of the strengths of the millennial generation is that being, you know, in some ways more creative and having more imagination. I do think that there's some weaknesses where, you know, you can be driven by emotions versus logic, and you could think of things or solutions more in an aspirational way versus a practical way. So like what you want to get out of something or how you think something should be is more aspirational rather than practical, or kind of hinged on how you feel rather than what it makes sense. And I do think that is in part a byproduct of being more creative and having more imagination. Again, good and maybe some bad or challenges to it. And so when you contrast this new generation and maybe think about how we think of old school teaching or thought process, and these are just examples from my faculty that I hear at meetings or when we're talking about, you know, trainees or issues or things that I have experienced myself as a trainee, learning from what I would consider old school faculty. And an old school way of teaching is really hinged on teaching content, didactics. Like, we needed the expert faculty to get the answer. Like, they had the answers. We needed them to give us the answer. And that's very like rooted in kind of a traditional didactic style of teaching. And along with that was watch and learn. I can't remember how many times I got told that when I was a resident. Watch and learn. You will get better if you watch and learn. And this idea of graduated responsibility, you got to crawl before you could walk, before you could run. And all of this is rooted in delayed gratification. There's nothing instant about watching and learning, or this idea of graduated responsibility, where over time you get better / do more / hone your skills. And so again, just to compare and contrast the old school versus some new school thinking. And then, put your head down. Don't stay in your lane. Put your head down. And that is a very non-millennial concept, if you think about it, with social media. Like, we're actually encourage people to speak up, to share your feelings, to post everything about your life and comment or tweet or anything. And it's very, very, very opposite to kind of what I think the current or younger generation mentality is of how they think about to process life and go about their day-to-day. And so knowing that, and knowing maybe the strengths and the challenges of the younger generation, and I think there's some ways to think about being a new school teacher in terms of adjusting with the times. So instead of thinking of yourself as the content provider, it's more about teaching concepts and philosophies, why you think what you think, or how did you figure out to know what you know or do what you do, rather than this is the answer I'm providing to you because I'm the content expert. And along those lines, giving direction and parameters versus rules. I think people, I don't know, maybe it's from this Montessori style of learning when they're kids, or there's not rules or specific tasks to do. But I do think that the newer learners do better when they're given objectives and given more parameters rather than specific, rules or lanes to stay in. And involving trainees in creating solutions. I've kind of gotten the most positive feedback when I just simply ask a trainee, how would they solve this problem, whether it's program related or for a patient or for another resident. I think that something gets stirred up in their mind that triggers these creative imaginations, or however they're wired. It triggers something. And I don't think this is actually unique or part and parcel for the millennials, but I think every generation and every person could do better if you focus on reasons why something will work, rather than focusing on the reasons why something won't work. I think we have the human nature. We're built in a way that we try to figure out why something's not right, or why something's not good to change, rather than thinking about why it might be good to change, or how it might work, for the better. And so taking all of these into account, my focus at the University of Washington is just to try to remind faculty and residents that it's not an us versus them thing. There's not old school versus new school, or faculty versus residents. We're kind of all in this together. And one thing to just know, that perception is as important as reality. We see examples of this as surgeons, where a patient's thinking that they're doing well after their surgery is more important than them actually doing well, however it is that we define. And so you could find examples of that all up and down medicine, but I think no greater example than when you're teaching residents. So, we want them to we want them to do better and improve, but it's almost as important for them to feel like they're getting better and improving. And that's the trick. That's the challenge. And along those lines, don't disregard how people feel. It's become more and more important about how people feel and what they perceive than what is actually happening, or how you perceive something is happening to someone else. But at the same token, don't let feelings drive decision making. Everything that we do is like rooted in reality and practicality, and so we have to be, stand firm in our beliefs when we think that that's what needs to be done, and we can't let perception or feelings of our trainees completely drive what we're trying to do or how we're trying to teach them. And then one thing that I try to do is remind our trainees and our med students and people that are looking to apply to our residency is that learning is a really active process. So a lot of the new generation, because of internet and social media and ease of everything, they think that once they plop down, that they can just learn, that they just can lean back and just learn, get their learn on, so to speak, by just passively existing. And we all know nothing could be further from the truth, that learning and getting better is a really active process that takes a lot of time and energy and intentionality. And that's a message that I keep trying to reiterate and reinforce with our trainees. And then lastly, and this is just a me thing, I don't know if it's a generational thing, but just trying to maintain the focus on others. When people are down, when they're depressed, when they're blue, it's mostly because you're just kind of shining the spotlight at yourself and like thinking about how your lot in life is not as good as you want it to be, or how you didn't get the reps you wanted, or how you didn't get treated how you wanted by somebody else, and when you could just take that spotlight and just turn it on anything else, especially another person, hopefully the patients that we are in charge of taking care of, that those feelings get better. And again, that's an exercise, like my own self-help thing that I've been trying to do, more of lately. So, again, that's, nothing really scientific about any of this stuff. And it's still a work in process of me just trying to understand how our current learners really will take to our teaching. But that's my take, as what I firmly believe to be a from the Gen X era, and hopefully just kind of keep modifying what we do to teach orthopedics to this future workforce, that they're going to be the ones taking care of us when we're broken and having cancers and hip fractures and geriatric ACLs and stuff.
Those are three terrific lectures, and again, ended on a high note with the focus on the next generation. Speaking as a Generation O for old, or Generation B for boomer person, one critical question for us was that sense of responsibility. I know I'm speaking like an old fogey, but how do you see that? We obviously did not have work hour restrictions nowadays. Everything seems to be just shift work, and that ultra responsibility for a patient may or may not actually be frowned upon, because you got to keep your hours to a large degree. So how does that work for you? Is that sense of responsibility, that dedication towards patient care and putting in the extra hours, less developed in this new generation, or with this ADD and just kind of, hey, we can manage this digitally, or is that just a fear of an old person?
That's such a great question. I think that fear is rooted in some reality that we see in the younger generation, where I don't think the younger generation thinks of orthopedic surgery as their defining who they are. I think many younger orthopedic surgeons in training think of this as an awesome way to make a difference and have a profession and a life. But I do think that the starkest difference between the boomers and Generation Y and Z is that when you became an orthopedic surgeon back in the day, that was everything. That was who you are. That was that made up the whole of who you are. You kind of, your whole identity was being an orthopedic surgeon. And I personally don't know if I feel that way, and I for sure don't know if I feel that our residents feel that way about being an orthopedic surgeon. And so I don't know how to reconcile that.
Great point. And a simple question. Are textbooks just dead? I mean, I know we had to read chapters with greatest dedication, and nowadays everything seems to just be little tidbits as much as it fits on a smartphone. So are textbooks just, should I clear out my bookshelves right here above me, or is everything now digital and ranked by algorithm?
Dead. I think they're dead.
Gone.
Yeah, and for three reasons. One is we just have digital subscriptions, so people just load up on their iPads or their desk or their laptops, Campbell's and Green's Hand and Delay and Drez, Sports. They just have the volumes loaded electronically. Number two, just that it's that idea that instant answers where in the time that it takes to create, proofread, publish a book, that data is like 2 or 3 years old at best. And the generation now, they won't tolerate something that's like 3 minutes old, like info that's 3 minutes old. They won't tolerate that now. So I personally believe that the books as we know it, textbooks, it's over.
You've just given me years of my life, because all those invitations for textbooks, I can ditch those now. I can just tell them, I'm done with that.
Yeah, no, well, they might be they'll be if they're a digital form, then and you get that info out really quick, then maybe you're onto something.
Great stuff. Thank you, UW. Thank you for all three of you for really providing very valuable perspectives. There'll be a very nice resource for our generation XYZ and the old fogies like myself. I know I had some texts from some of my colleagues who watched on Facebook, and they concur that it's so exciting to have such bright young minds take us a big step forward. And thank you, Dr. G, also for joining us there, and congrats to your work. And hopefully we'll see you next month when we talk about how to teach and implement osteoporosis to everyday care.